It might not be a long story, but it is a story. During the dying years of the 20th century, around the time the country was otherwise distracted by the forthcoming cataclysm of the Millennium Bug, I was in the employ of a landscape preservation charity. The charity had received a number of reports of strange phenomena occurring amongst native trees in a section a couple of miles radius within the mid-eastern quadrant of the North York Moors. In a small dense wood on the edge of Langdale Forest, a significant number of large healthy trees with strong root structures had been toppled, seemingly without human or meteorological assistance. In addition, many trees had branches growing in unusual patterns toward neighbouring trees, with the result that, to all intents and purposes, the trees had begun to strangle each other. I booked one of the only cottages in the surrounding area and planned to stay for 6 days, enabling me enough time to both photograph and map the affected trees in wood. The cottage was a dozen or so miles away from wood, and I drove every day from the cottage onto the main road, turning off a mile or so past Filingdales, and then a short drive on toward the wood. I'd been driven past RAF Filingdales many years before on the way to a family holiday. I distinctly remembered the eerily still atmosphere and the 3 enormous golf ball domes incongruously teed up on the landscape. By now, of course, the domes had long since been dismantled. The Cold War was over and we were, thankfully, safe again. So as I drove along, the expected shape of the missing enormous domes projected an imaginary scar on the landscape. For 3 consecutive days I drove from the cottage past Filingdales and onto the wood. On the 4th day, early morning mist greeted me. I drove along drinking in the eerie stillness. Suddenly a pristine white Land Rover appeared out of the mist behind me and accelerated sharply, then swerved out and then directly in front of my car. The Land Rover repeatedly bounced on the brakes, causing me to slow down, eventually forcing me down on a marked side road until a very sudden halt. 3 military policemen launched out of that Land Rover and headed straight to the side windows. They stood looking and nodding at my camera, tripod and kit laid out on the back seat. A huge officer screamed, "Get out of that car now!" and I was unceremoniously wrenched out of the car. This mountain of a man held me by the scruff of my throat in one hand, whilst wielding a metal bar in the other. He proceeded to bark at me, telling me that, "You've been spotted passing this way for the last 3 days. If you wish your legs to remain in an unbroken state, I would suggest you never pass this way again." He scrunched his fist, tightening his grip, and instructed me to carry on along the unclassified road, and from now on, to go the long way around. He then threw me back in the car and pushed the metal truncheon under my chin to serve as a final reminder, as if a reminder was needed. I set off, gripped by terror and gasping for air, desperately referencing my rear-view mirror, hoping and praying that they wouldn't follow. They didn't. After a few minutes of driving, I started to calm myself down. The unclassified road was little more than a dirt track, and the concentration required to keep on the track proved a welcome distraction. As I got further along the road, the early morning mist became thicker and thicker, my headlights cutting only a few feet into the heavy milky murk. I slowed down to a crawl but dare not stop, fearing the white Land Rover may be following. Above the sound of the barely troubled engine, I could hear outside the windows a gentle hum that sounded like insects purring in unison. As I continued to drive, the sound got louder and louder, and began to sound like the low, monotone hum of electrical power. The frequency of this hum began to resonate inside of my head. I tried to shake it off, but there it stayed, gnawing at me from the inside, slowly beginning to destroy my senses in an unimaginable torture. Barely able to function, the car stalled and the headlights cut out. The endless sea of mist was so thick now that no light permeated, and a dead night wove itself in amongst the mist. The sound gradually became more distinct and resonated at a higher frequency to that which had been melting my brain. I could now hear the merest whisper of human voices. hundreds of human voices spoken so quietly that I could not make out any words. But then as the voices got closer, they intensified and multiplied, and I could hear the words spoken. Thousands of different pleading voices. Out of the darkness, barely distinguishable faces zoomed toward my windscreen. Tragic, haunted, doomed faces in the very grips of hell itself racing towards me. An uncontrollable fear and madness surged from my soul, and it charged into my being with such power that I knew my body could not hold out much longer. I closed my eyes and waited for the inevitable ending. As I closed them, there was a sudden, absolute silence. Was I dead? Had my senses been destroyed? I tentatively opened my eyes. I was in my bedroom at home. I looked at my digital alarm clock, and it was 5 days later. I somehow dragged my exhausted body to the window and looked out to see my car parked out on the drive. I'd lost 5 days that I'd never regain any memory of. Had I suffered a temporary bout of madness or fever, or had I been warned off something? I didn't know. I didn't know what had happened, and I just needed to put it out of my mind. After a few days, I resigned from my job and thus began a very slow recovery. A year or so ago, an ex-colleague from the charity messaged me to see how I was getting on. He told me he'd had something on his conscience for a long time. He knew that something bad must have happened on that visit, and he'd done some brief investigations of his own following my resignation. But the story was ordered to be shut down by the directors. Years later, he began quietly looking into that area, an area named Black Meadow. After a few months of digging, he discovered he wasn't alone in his pursuit. He passed my details on to Chris Lambert, a collector and curator of artifacts, stories and curios connected to the Black Meadow. For the first and only time since those dreadful events, I shared with him what had happened to me, and he said that he knew. Perhaps he meant he understood. A few days later, an unsealed parcel landed on my mat. I picked it up and out stood a copy of a book, Tales from the Black Meadow by Chris Lambert. I recognised immediately wood near Langdale Forest that was on the front cover. I read through the stories and prose with a constant feeling that I'd somehow known them before, and more that I'd always known them, like some kind of innate timeless imprinting. On the inside of the back cover was written in bold, neat handwriting, "These will help you, Chris Lambert." And below that, in almost illegibly time-faded fountain pen, was scrawled, "And Roger Mullins, 1972. To repay my debt of gratitude and to put a final full stop to this chapter of my life, I worked with Angeline Morrison on a song based on my experience on the Black Meadow that day. That song's called The Meadow's Call. I wish never again to speak of my terrifying experiences that day on the Black Meadow.